ultimate authority in the government? Did the King of England have sovereignty? Actually, and yourself? Zachary Wilson. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wilson. And yourself?
Bradley Wilson.
Similar names is not circumstantial? Actually, from his glance, it would appear that you are his brother. And yourself?
Joseph Wilson.
Joseph
Wilson.
Wolski. And from what part of the country do you come? Dunkirk. And yourself? I'm sorry? Marissa Kelsch? Kelsch. K-E-L-S-H? And yourself?
Olivia Walski.
Wolski, that's another name, right? And yourself?
Andrew Mensinger.
Andrew Mensinger. That's the German name. Do you speak German?
No.
And yourself?
Ronnie Shute.
Mr. Shute? And yourself?
Reed Bolger.
Mr. Bolger.
Bronwyn Lewandowski.
Lewandowski. Must be a legitimate name. I can't imagine what could have composed it on the spur of the moment. Yes. And yourselves?
Louise Kelsch.
Miss Kelsch. Some related, your sister, perhaps. She must
Debbie
be married
Shoup.
into the situation. I'm sorry?
Debbie Shoup.
Shoot.
Faye Kepner.
Skepner and
Tristan.
Tristan. And yourself?
Anthony Mensinger.
Rozier, indeed. And the one next to you?
Jacob Mensinger.
Mr. Mensinger. My pleasure, Mr. Mensinger.
Hi, I'm Amy Mensinger.
Mensinger. And the young lady in your...
Safira.
I'm sorry?
Safira.
Safira. She seems to be the most ambitious to seek other appointments just now.
Jeff Wilson.
Mr. Wilson?
Georgiana Wilson. Michelle Walski. Val Bolger.
There are a number of similar names which might indicate relation to one another. Perhaps I may commence in posing a question to some of you for you to consider. When the Constitutional Convention met in 1787, one of the difficulties it had, first of all, was to acknowledge the deficiencies of the government that was already in place. Does anyone know the name of that government that was in place right after 1776 and carried us through 1787? It carried us through the war. It was a government confederation of many of the states. Do you know what the name of that, what document the states followed during that time? The Articles of Confederation, exactly. The Articles of Confederation were 13 articles that served as an agreement for 13 different states to work together. Under this agreement, each state was itself a sovereign nation. They acted like a sovereign nation. They had ambassadors to foreign countries. They received foreign ambassadors into the state. They had agents abroad. They negotiated everything with other states and with other nations. But they had similarity problems in 1776. What was the problem that all 13 states had? It was rather a confrontational problem. They declared their independence, but who said, no, you're not going to be independent? England. And what happened between England and the United States in 1776?
Basically sparked an all-out war.
An all-out war. The war lasted for nearly 7 years. Well, during those 7 years, the states independently declared their independence. You hear about the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, but actually each state declared its own independence from England. And then collectively, they declared themselves independent from England with a Declaration of Independence. And each state then being formed realized that it by itself could not defeat England. It required all the states to work together to defeat England. And so they organized these Articles of Confederation and agreed to work together to fight England. And after the war was over, Actually, the articles weren't ratified by all the states until 1781, until the war was virtually over. After the war was over, they continued these articles of confederation, this agreement, loose agreement to work with one another. But it was evident with the passing years that they could not. There were controversies over the use of the Chesapeake, fishing rights between Maryland and Virginia and the Chesapeake, and the right of who controls the Potomac River. And there were people who from Rhode Island would take a wagon to sell their wares in Massachusetts and be charged high taxes to bring their goods to sell them into Massachusetts. Massachusetts then would send their wagons into Rhode Island. Rhode Island would charge even a higher tariff on Massachusetts goods. There were those in Massachusetts, after the war, Massachusetts could not pay all of its debts to the citizens of Massachusetts, its debts that had incurred during the war. And so the Assembly in Massachusetts told all the sheriffs in all the counties in Massachusetts that they had to go and collect taxes from the people to pay for the debts of Massachusetts. And they told the sheriffs that they're the ones responsible for collecting the taxes. They also told the sheriffs that if they could not raise the taxes they were allocated to raise, the sheriffs would have to pay the difference. You would have to go into Anne Arundel County and collect monies from those people in Anne Arundel as the sheriff of Anne Arundel. And if you couldn't raise $10,000 you were supposed to raise, you only raised $6,000, you would have to pay the other $4,000 yourself. This is what the sheriffs were told. This is very difficult. Sheriffs, there was no money to be collected. The sheriffs had to pay the difference. And there were people who had farms, and they were being taxed and losing their farms. And that gave rise to Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, 86. These rebellions and these difficulties of taxation, these difficulties of claims of the Mississippi, or rather the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay, these were just part and parcel to whole numbers of controversies amongst the states. And because they could not work together under the Articles of Confederation, that's why they wanted to write a new constitution for the several states to cherish and preserve the union of the states. But in so writing this new constitution, it's a very, very dramatic point, not only in the history of this country, but in the history of the world. At no time ever had a people decided to form a government that would implement the democratic and Republican principles that this group of men sought to do in 1787. And when they form this new government, they do so with a number of principles, democratic Republican principles in mind. And this is very different than any other country in the world has ever done before. People have always been ruled by monarchies or by plutocracies. Plutocracies are those who are governments that are run by people who are the most wealthy, a few people who are wealthy. And these kinds of governments that were reformed were very, very autocratic. In other words, the rule and the authority was put in a very few people. England made dramatic steps in with the Magna Carta to reduce the power of the king in England. And by 1354, in the revision of the Magna Carta, to enhance the authority of the Parliament. And years of passing years in England over the last 200 or 300 years, England has changed dramatically the authority of the king in England and has raised the authority of the Parliament. But even England was not conducting itself anywhere near what was being proposed in 1787 in Philadelphia. And with this dramatic change, it was necessary to progress slowly so that they could come to understand one another, the members of the Constitutional Convention, and also understand the